Governor's Water Council. Today we're having a meeting of the subcommittee to the Long-Term Water Augmentation Committee that is looking at selecting sites for additional storage. The chairman of the subcommittee is Doug Dunham, who was called away unexpectedly this morning just before he was going to chair the meeting. And in as much as I'm not completely prepared and we have those who are much better prepared, we're going to turn the time over now to Carol Ward of ADWR to go ahead and complete the agenda. Carol?
Thank you, Wade. I appreciate the introduction and that you stepped in for the ceremonial chair. I am, as Wade said, Carol Ward. I'm Deputy Assistant Director. I just don't need my own title right. It's a long one for planning and permitting here at the department. I would also like to welcome this morning a new addition to our team, John Riggins. John is now the department's statewide planning manager. He was previously the department's compliance enforcement officer and ombudsman, and prior to that, he was the first council coordinator and the Northwest Basin's planner. So we are very pleased to have him in this role, and he'll be working closely with the council and its committees moving forward. So we also have a number of other DWR staff on the line today, and I'll introduce them as they take on their parts of the meeting. First, Kennedy, if you could advance the slide and just run through the webinar logistics for us, I'd appreciate it.
Of course. Thanks, Carol. Good morning, everyone. My name is Kennedy Shepard, and I'm just going to be running through the webinar logistics before we get started today. We do ask that please state your name when you are speaking. If you are not speaking, we do ask that you remain muted. It helps with audio feedback. To indicate to wish that you would like to speak, please type your name in the chat box and you will be invited to, excuse me, unmute and speak at that time. If you would like to type your question or comment in the chat box, please make sure that it is being sent to everyone, so that way everyone can see it in the chat. Finally, this meeting is being recorded, and that includes everything that is put into the chat. If you are having any technical difficulties, please feel free to direct message the ADWR host, or our help desk is available to you, and their contact information is on the screen. That is all I have. Carol, back to you.
Okay, thanks so much. If you would advance the slide, please, Kennedy. Okay, thanks, and go ahead one more. Thanks, perfect. So this is the agenda we have before us today. I wanted to give you a brief reminder of where we are with the subcommittee. This subcommittee was formed to identify criteria for the selection of potential underground water storage sites. The criteria would potentially be used to revise the potential water storage sites on Arizona State Trust land report completed in 2017. For that report, the Department of Water Resources identified 331 potential underground storage sites. These were further prioritized by state lands to just 2 potential sites. And what we wanted to do was to select some criteria that would help us narrow that original 331 sites, some, but not as much as to limit it to just 2 potential sites. So we've met 3 times, and we've wrestled to identify criteria beyond those utilized in the identification of the 331 sites. At the last meeting, the subcommittee selected a number of different areas in the state and then asked the department staff to select potential sites within each of those areas and then evaluate the selected sites to see if there were common criteria among them that surfaced and would help enable us in winnowing that list of 331 to some degree. So we have completed that task, and Jeff Inwood, the department's chief hydrologist, is here with us today to go over the results of that analysis. So Kennedy, if you would advance the slide, please. Jeff, I will turn it over to you.
Sorry about that. Thanks, Carol. Again, as Carol mentioned, my name is Jeff Inwood. I am the Chief Hydrologist here at the Department of Water Resources. And I'm going to give a hopefully brief presentation on the work that was assigned to DWR at the last in-person subcommittee meeting. It will basically consist of two parts: a very brief refresher of the Senate Bill 1399 and the results of that led to the selection of the 331 sites, and then an overview and presentation on the common criteria evaluation that Carol referenced, and then we can have a little discussion at the end. So going back a few years to 2016, Senate Bill 1399 was passed, and it directed ADWR and State Land Department to develop a report that identified water storage sites on state trust land, both above ground and below ground, by the end of 2017. ADWR portion, I'm going to focus primarily on the underground storage sites portion of this work, since that's what we're really doing as part of this subcommittee. And we had a simple criteria at DWR, search criteria. We basically were identifying parcels of land that had some sort of water course that crossed it. It could be anything from ephemeral to perennial. It had to have state land ownership, and it had to be on alluvial materials, not bedrock or hard rock that wouldn't be receptive to underground storage. And then we eliminated sites along canals, anything in the Colorado River floodplain area or close to that would go into the Colorado River, and existing underground storage facility sites. Next slide, please. I'm going to be very quick here. We identified DWR with that analysis 331 sites. Then we turned those over to the State Land Department. They implemented another analysis with criteria that's listed there. I'm not going to go into them. You can see them on there. That then, with their analysis, whittled the list of 331 sites down to 2. See those at the bottom of the screen. Cunningham Wash, which is in Butler Valley Groundwater Basin, and Whitewater Draw, which is in Cochise County. I have a map that'll be coming up in a few slides where I'm going to show these sites and some other sites, so you'll get to see where those are in a moment. Next slide. So again, as Carol stated, the next step was to do a common criteria evaluation. And with that, the subcommittee selected 5 areas upon which the department then identified 1 or 2 state land parcels within each of those areas to apply the common criteria evaluation to. And again, it was designed to try to see if we could identify common criteria that was applicable to these sites that we were looking at. And if so, if we found common criteria, we could then apply it to the remainder of the 331 sites and then help whittle those 331 sites down. These areas that we've selected were due in part, some of these areas have challenges. Also, some of them are high profile areas. And then we also tried to get a smattering around the state so that we weren't looking at just one particular area. Next slide. So I'll be very upfront and honest. It was very hard to try to come up with some criteria to try to evaluate for the commonness across these sites that we were looking at. Basically, these are, it was an effort to come up with physical attributes, basically, that we could, we had readily available data. We couldn't, for example, go out and do a detailed analysis in order to get the results to then apply as a common criteria. For example, we couldn't do subsurface lithology because it would cost too much to go out and drill and get the lithology in order to do this evaluation. The same thing, such as if you wanted to look at the water supply as a common criteria. Again, too much evaluation would have to be done up front before we could even evaluate that. So with that being said, these were the common criteria or attributes that the department came up with. Again, challenging to come up with these, but these are what we came up with. Next slide, please. So here is the map that I was referring to. I'll go through this, is fairly detailed, and I know some of it's hard to see at this scale. I believe we'll be providing this out so people can zoom into it in more detail on their own after the fact. But if you look real closely, you'll see what looks like a number of reddish or orangish polygons that are spread out throughout the state. Those consist of the 331 original sites that were identified as a result of the Senate Bill 1399 effort. Again, they're hard to see, but if you notice, there's a big concentration in the Southeast Valley. There are a lot in the west, I'm sorry, not Southeast Valley, southeast part of the state. There's also a lot in the western portion of the state and some in the northwest. Very little in the northeast portion of the state just because of the lack of alluvial type aquifers and lack of state land ownership. So those are the 331 sites that are spread out across the state. If you look at the orange boxes, they point to the Cunningham Wash and Whitewater Draw sites that were the two identified by state land as part of the Senate Bill 1399 analysis. You can see them, Cunningham Wash in Butler Valley and Whitewater Draw down in Cochise County. The blue squares highlight the sites that were selected for the common criteria evaluation. We have a site up in the Prescott AMA. We have one in the Pinal AMA. We have one in the Santa Cruz AMA. We have two in the Upper San Pedro Basin, the Sierra Vista subwatershed portion, and then one in the Wilcox Basin. I'll stop there. Any questions so far? Okay, next slide, please.
I did have a question.
Oh, go ahead, Representative Griffin.
Okay, were there any mountain front recharge areas selected? I see all the selections were along watersheds, but I think mountain front recharge areas might be a good location as well.
Well,
is it the type of soil or lack thereof?
Well, I'm going to drill down to the sites now specifically, and we can look at those. And then I would say we didn't pick out sites just up against the mountain front, but a lot of these are in the pediment section, which is between the mountain front and the valley floor. So they're in that transition area. You'll see that as we walk through this.
Okay, thank you.
So I'm going to try to be brief here. what the next several slides will show is each site, where it's located on a map, and then the attributes and criteria that we identified, and then the results for each of those. I want to point out that some of the criteria we were able to access data sources that include the State Climatologist Office for the precipitation values, the Arizona Geological Survey mapping for the depth of bedrock. We used topo elevation maps or topo maps for the elevation, and the Arizona Game and Fish vegetation mapping that they've done. So we tried to identify the criteria where we could access some data that was readily available. On the map, if you look, this first one is the Prescott AMA site, and the site that we evaluated is the one in light blue. You will see some other gray parcels that are identified within the AMA. Those are part of the other, those sites are part of the 331 identified sites as part of the original Senate bill. I'm going to go through at the end. We've got a nice summary table which will put all the attributes, criteria together so that you can compare them for each of the sites. So I'm just going to kind of run through these quickly now, and then we'll have an opportunity to talk about each of the site attributes if necessary. Next slide, please. So the next site is in the Pinal AMA in the western portion, Green Wash. Should be able to see that again. It's in light blue. It's a fairly large site. I don't know exactly how many acres it is, but fairly significant in size. I'll just point out this is a low precipitation area. Annual precipitation over roughly a 20-year period is about 10 inches. Next site, or next slide, please. Next is the Wilcox Basin, the Bee Canyon and Wood Canyon washes. Again, look for the light blue parcel. It's towards the northwest part of the basin. Two washes intersect the parcels there. And again, the attributes results are listed there. The little more precipitation here on average, also a higher elevation, 4,400 feet above sea level. Next slide, please. The next site is in the Santa Cruz AMA, in the northern portion of the AMA. Again, I'll just see the light blue. Diablo Wash is the watercourse that does intersect the parcels. I'll leave this up for just a moment. Again, due to the somewhat higher elevation, more precipitation, little different vegetation cover. I have a aerial photograph that we'll show in a minute that shows some interesting features about this site. Next slide. And here is that, this is an aerial satellite photograph of the area. And what I wanted to point out here, Representative Griffin, this kind of might help a little bit. This, although I don't know if this is necessarily mountain front, but it is on the hillside that coming from the mountain front, and like Sierra Vista area, this is a site in between the mountain front and the Santa Cruz River, which again might be a beneficial aspect of this site, because this recharge, any underground storage in this area would probably benefit the Santa Cruz River over time. Next slide, please. Now we have 2 sites down in the Sierra Vista area. The first one is Clifford Wash, identified as Site A here. Again, decent, more than the valley, a higher average of precipitation, little similar higher elevation, and a little more remote than the other site we're going to see here next. Next slide, please. So if you look down at the bottom of the map, Site B, which is it's an unnamed wash that runs through the city of Sierra Vista. I'll have an aerial photograph to show you momentarily. Again, Representative Griffin, this one we thought was particularly good to show because it's one that's inside of an urban setting that might be appropriate for capture of surface runoff within a municipality. And I'll show you an aerial photo of that now. Next slide, please. So you see the hatched pattern undeveloped land here within the cities. I believe that's within the city incorporated boundaries. And again, with the wash running through, but ideally there is a lot of development around these, so could be potential for diverting or detaining water runoff and using it for beneficial purposes. Next slide, please. So I know that was really fast, and that was my intent. Here is a summary table that shows the different criteria on the vertical axis and the sites on the horizontal axis, and then the values for each of the common criteria that we evaluated. Again, the goal was to try to see if the results of any of these common criteria indicate that they would be appropriate for applying on a more broad basis to the large number of sites that ADWR identified a couple of years ago. I'll just give my overview of it, and then I'll take questions or feedback on this. Really, the results don't really show much in the way of common criteria that can be applied to all or most of the sites, except the development status. As I went through this, I kind of realized that most state land parcels, maybe all of them, are not going to be developed as far as quote unquote development, something being built on it. We don't know, for example, if they're leasing, grazing leases or any kind of leases on the land. We didn't do that analysis, but that wasn't really considered development. So in general, did not really come up with any common criteria that we believe could be applied to the other sites around the state. With that, I'll just leave that up, and I'm happy to take questions or comments.
I think this is a good start. You know, I think most of us would settle for 10 inches of rain this year, because we got very little last year. But
yes,
I just think we need to take advantage of the free water we get from the sky, and when 95% of it evaporates, goes down hard surface roads and evaporates, and/or evaporates. And so I think, you know, with what we're doing in Cochise County, I think it's something we can duplicate throughout the state and help these other areas with a good project.
Thank you, Representative Griffin. Yes, we agree, and still Carol's thunder, but you know, when we did this, which we did the bulk of this work a few months ago, we kind of felt that we needed to look more into a direction where, yes, we have these 331 sites. How can we help identify or help projects get developed on those sites? And the sites vary. They have different jurisdictions, different overlays of management. So there's opportunity for the local, I'll call it local, but you know, the local areas and their organizations to identify those sites, and how can we help them get projects developed for those that want to do them. So yeah, and that's going to come up here later in this meeting, where we're going to talk about those efforts. Again, I think, Carol, we're going to make this available so everyone can digest this a little more if they feel like it, and follow up to me with questions. I'd be glad to answer them.
This is John Ladd. Did I get on?
Yes, we hear you.
Okay, hallelujah. I figured out how to unmute. Okay.
Welcome.
Thank you.
So not hearing anything else. I'll turn it back over to Carol, and thank you much.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. I appreciate that. So as Jeff was saying, we came to the conclusion that given the variables that we have, we can't realistically evaluate where it would be best to site projects on a statewide basis beyond the basic parameters that we use to identify those 331 sites. And we didn't want to exclude opportunities that are best identified by the individuals and communities and organizations on the ground who know their specific circumstances. The 331 sites statewide provide numerous locations for further investigation by individuals or communities. So we feel that those in the community are best prepared to evaluate the goals, opportunities, partnerships, and their ability to undertake a project and at what scale they may want to implement a project. And we tried to see this through the eyes of someone who might want to undertake a storage project. What would they need to consider? What resources might be helpful to them? We started outlining what we thought it might look like, kind of a guide or a checklist to assist stakeholders in making preliminary assessments themselves. So we shared an outcome of our analysis of the sites that we just shared with you here today with Representative Griffin, and we also provided her with an initial outline of a guide to locating a potential underground water storage project. And she provided some very helpful feedback, and she also gave us a great contact, John Ladd, who's on the call with us today, that we could turn to for some firsthand insight and experience. We spoke to a number of people and invited two of them, John and another person that we have online with us today, Nick Hunt, to present briefly to this group today about the work that they've done with underground storage sites. So Kennedy, if you could advance the slide, please. So we have two presenters today, and each of them will take about 15 up to 15 minutes is what we're approximating. And I'd like to introduce John Ladd, who is a fourth-generation rancher in the Bisbee area. He is the chairman of the NRCD Board of Supervisors, and he's going to tell us a little bit about the Horseshoe Draw project that is constructed on his family ranch, in fact. So we're really glad to have you with us, John. If you could unmute yourself and tell us a little bit about this project, how it came to be, and some of the considerations that you had in citing this project.
Well, thank you. Everybody hear me okay?
Perfectly.
Yes.
Yes.
Good. Okay. Well, it's a pleasure to participate. we started, it took us 11 years to coordinate the project. And my dad and I were both repairing dirt dikes to control erosion in a big runoff coming out of Mexico that goes into the San Pedro River. And we had, we've got two D8 Caterpillars and replacing and repairing the dike. And every time it rained big, it'd wash out. And what we ended up doing was, and my dad was the chairman of the district then, but through the Hereford NRCD, we started applying for grants. And we had very little success with that also. But then we got a grant from the clean water money out of the state to do a study. And that was, I think, $90,000. But the biggest, the percolation studies of how easy it would be to get the runoff into the ground. That was my opinion of the big issue to prove that it would work. And originally it was just for erosion control. And then Linda Searle had done several E. coli studies on the San Pedro during flood events, and it ended up that there was E. coli associated with the horseshoe draw. So then ADEQ had a grant process that for clean water and E. coli. So we got that grant, which was about $700,000. And then you had to have a private match, and that was an issue. We did the study on the percolation, and everything was good. Well, it took another year, and then the Buffett Foundation provided the private money to complete the project. So we had the money. Then the process was go to the Corps of Engineers first, ADWR second, because of the proximity to the San Pedro River is why the Corps was involved. That took about 3 months to get that permit. The ADWR studied it, determined that we could build the structure, but then we needed flood insurance, basically. And then we got an architect and started designing it. Well, we came up with a design, got the permits, and built it. And in the meantime, the liability issue with flood insurance and maintenance, the Hereford district couldn't afford any of that. So Cochise County got involved with it. And so my dad and I gave them easement on 50 acres and a road access in. And so they have the flood insurance and the maintenance. And so that basically is how it got built. And it's been successful. There's in the CCR program, we've agreed that that's part of their project list. And even though contributing to the aquifer was not one of the main criteria, it was erosion control and E. coli control, it is recharging the aquifer better than any other project from what I've understood from the data that is coming out. We've got monitors on it, and they're coming in pretty regular looking at what is actually getting into the ground. Yeah. And there were two things that the Corps of Engineers was very helpful, and we got a national permit instead of local. Locally, with the proximity to the river, probably wouldn't have happened. And so they agreed it was beneficial. We'll do it national. the environmental community was concerned about having an effect on the peak flow of the San Pedro. And they weren't very thrilled with having anything holding up the floodwater for 24 hours. And my response to them was, well, you tell me what the peak flow of the river is, and I'll tell you what we're going to affect it by. Well, they can't tell me what the peak flow is, so that got to be a moot issue. And then there was a little concern that the county was doing a land grab, but we didn't sell them the land. We just gave them an easement.
Mm-hmm.
So that worked out real well. But I believe the answer is the hard part about doing it is if you have any federal money involved, you have to have a private partner. And then secondly, you have to have your county government involved to be able to support the maintenance and any insurance that's involved with it. But it's been working real well.
Well, that's great.
And
Thank you.
But it takes, you know, well, talking with CCRN, and I'm on that group, but I would say that once you establish a site, you better figure a year to get everything coordinated with permits and everything. It just isn't going to happen overnight.
Right. That's helpful insight, John. Thank you. Does anybody have questions? Please feel free to unmute yourself or type it into the chat box. We're a small group, so don't hesitate to jump in.
John,
Oh, go ahead.
John, this is Jeff Inwood. So I understand, you're just collecting runoff down Horseshoe Draw, or are you detaining it temporarily? How physically, process-wise, how does it work?
Well, it is runoff, and it's about 9,000 acres, and the majority of that's in Mexico. And it's a big drainage that runs north and then a little bit west that ties into the San Pedro River at Highway 92. And so there's a big area of the runoff. Horseshoe Draw is a 8-acre basin with it's pretty much square in configuration with earthen berms, and there's an inlet and an outlet, concrete inlet with riprap. So the floodwater comes through the inlet, gets into the basin, and then at the outlet, there's 3 36-inch culverts. And the criteria is that that 8-acre basin had to completely drain in 24 hours to justify the Gila River adjudication. And so even when it's filling up with floodwater, it is still processing through the outlet, but it backs it up in that 8 acres. And the biggest event we've had is that there's about 5 feet of water in that basin. And so that's when it's getting the chance. That the number one criteria with the ADEQ grant was when that water is backed up in the basin, the sunlight's killing the E. coli. And then the side benefit was in the 24 hours that stored water percolates down into the aquifer. And even though it's still running out the outlets, and then it continues on down to the northwest to tie into the San Pedro.
Great.
And that project was, the contractor price was $1.4 million. And then the district, with the contributions and in kind and all that, but it was about $1.9 million on paper, but dollar wise it was about $1.4 million.
Thank you.
And John, it was an old site. There was evidence of an old site that was there with the block, with the stones and such. Was it in the 40s that they had put something in there?
Oh, it was before that, Gail. It was it goes back to the CCC boys.
Yes.
And then there was, we had a series of 4 dikes in there going downstream, and those were originally built with horse teams and Fresnos.
Uh-huh.
And then those were what were in need of maintenance. And so that's when my dad and I started repairing them on our own. And we had several big flood events, and it would, in the big events, it would wash out 2 of those dikes.
Uh-huh.
And then there was a big dike down on the Paloma Road that coming in from the Bright Spot, and they had culverts in it, and that really was the key downstream to holding up the water. Well, a developer went in there and took that dike out. Well, when that happened, the head cutting was going back upstream at about 20 to 50 feet a summer because the water just ripped through there. And we couldn't keep up with the repairs on the earthen structures that were originally put in the 20s.
20s. Well, the point being that particular site was identified a long time ago as a good site to put a project together.
Absolutely, yeah. All of that. Well, the Horseshoe Draw is probably 2 miles east of the San Pedro River Basin, but the CCC boys I think there's 7 different structures where they did the rock work for erosion control on earthen structures. Mm-hmm. So they knew it back in the 20s that was a good location to slow down and contain floodwater. Mm-hmm. So that was that was all a benefit when we were proposing the project. And I will tell you the other part of it is we had to have an art clearance on it that that cost that was about $10,000 to do the art clearance. Mm-hmm. That's another federal regulation. Anytime federal money's used. But if you understand the process dealing with the bureaucracies, it's not bad. And the more information you have, the easier it is to get all the permits.
And if the different agencies are working together, it makes it a lot easier, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. And I left you. You were heavily involved with justifying doing the project. So I mean that's what it takes.
And we've had tours down there, so they've been the local community is more than receptive to bragging about the project. And if somebody wants to take a look at it, we could schedule a tour sometime in the future.
Yeah, you're right. We had the groundbreaking and the ribbon cutting, and Gail was at both of them, and then I think we've had 3 tours since it's been completed, and everybody. I think the majority of the people, I said everybody, but I'd say the majority of them. And I did hear Gail talk about taking benefit of the rain and the water down here. It comes ripping through, gets in the river, and it is gone in 48 hours. It ties into the Gila and then just dumps out up at the freeway. And I've always felt that we can manage that water and recharge that. And there's a lot of politics with that too, both sides of the issue. But to me, that when you have that water going through uncontained, you're just wasting it. And especially now with the aquifer problems and everything else, and we're recharging, and that, I think that's the answer.
Well, thank you, John. This is a really great success story, and I think you made some really excellent points about what it takes to accomplish this, which was exactly what we were hoping to hear today. I really appreciate your time. Does anybody else have another question for John?
One more, Carol, and John, congratulations for hanging in there for 11 years.
Persistence is a big piece of this, huh?
Well, if you congratulate my dad, he's 94 and he's still alive. But when we started this deal, he said, "Oh, I'll never see it done," but he did. So he's really proud of it. So.
Could you describe? You mentioned the county doing the maintenance. Could you describe what kind of maintenance you do, and then do you pay for that, or does the county pay for that?
No, the county pays for that, and it's $3,000 a year is what they budgeted. And with being an earthen structure, we've had some big events. And even though we only got 2 inches of rain this summer, we had 5 floods through Horseshoe Draw coming out of Mexico. But the one problem, and we knew this when we built it, on the inlets and the outlet, they have a gunite bottom, and then they came up on the sides of the structure, and that's the way to do it. And then to cheapen it up, they put like 12-inch river rock as a decelerator and erosion control. And the flood events just wash that rock right out of the area they're supposed to be in the inlet and the outlet. And my opinion is don't mess with rocks, just put concrete in the bottom of it. And we were on a budget, and that's what happened. And that is the only maintenance that the county's done so far. And there's been a little bit of erosion coming off of some of the slopes down by the head wall of the discharge culverts. But it isn't affecting anything. It doesn't look good, but it isn't hurting anything. And so they'll come in and push dirt back in the erosion, and they've come in and tried to grout some of those 12-inch rocks in place, and even grouting them in place doesn't work. But so it's minimum maintenance, but in a big event, I suppose it could wash out some of the berms, and then we also have a spillway in it in case too big of an event, it'll quit running through the culverts and then run over in the throated spillway. And I guess I'll tell you this, my other observation is that the inlet and the outlet are lined up. They're straight north of each other. And if I was going to do it again, I'd put the inlet on the west end and the outlet on the east end of the 8 acres. And that would give that water time to come in and slow itself down even more and then go out the opposite way. Because it's just a straight shot right now. And we do lose a little bit that way, but in a bigger event, it'll fill up 5 feet deep probably. But I would offset the inlet and the outlet. And I'd pour concrete on both the inlet and the outlet instead of rocks. And other than that, I think earthen structures are fine. You don't want to make them vehicle accessible or anything like that. You know, big enough to control the floods, but you don't want to deal with public access or vehicle access. And I deal with vehicle a little bit on Border Patrol trying to get to where they're going to go. But that's what the county also put signs up that notifying. And it's on private property, but anyway, the public is no trespassing, Cochise County Flood Control Project. So that's helped a lot. So it's, and we're a little, I don't know what would the any of the issues being closer to cities and towns, but you're going to deal with people around them.
And thank you, John. Maybe that's something Nick might touch on here. If it's okay with everybody, we will move on here to our next presenter.
Let me make one further comment, Carol, if I might. So, that particular project looks at erosion control, loss of soil, and recharge of water that we ordinarily would maybe evaporate. So it takes care of several different issues. So thank you, John, for participating.
Well, thank you. And are you done with me?
Yes.
I think we are.
I think we can release you, John. Thank you so much for making the time to be with us today.
Term, but, well, I sure appreciate you reaching out to me, and we'll, if you guys want whatever you need from us, let us know. And thank you I think this is a worthwhile project to look statewide. I think that's the answer of what's coming.
I agree.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, really appreciate your insight and your experience. This has been very interesting. Thank you so much.
Good deal. Well, thank you, guys.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye.
Bye-bye. All right. Well, now we will move along to the Wallapai Valley Basin, Kingman Subbasin area. Nick Hunt from Mojave County is with us today and has a range of projects to share with us. Nick, are you ready to go?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you very much for the invitation. Jeff Inwood invited me to give some specific examples on our local efforts with Mojave County and the city of Kingman. And I thank you for the invitation. Again, I am an engineer with Mojave County. And if I can go ahead, please move to the next slide. Just a very brief introduction. This presentation is very specific about the Wallapai Valley Basin and the Kingman Subbasin. So basically, we are concerned with the water supply for the city of Kingman and the surrounding areas. And as we have in Mojave County, several alluvial basins, which is basically, very simply said, it's like a bowl of water. Bedrock is the bottom, and then it's filled up with sediments, with alluvium that contains the water, and it's a typical groundwater aquifer. It's mostly unconfined. So the depth goes down to 1,000, 7,000 feet. And I might want to say that the recharge is less than the discharge. So basically, we're losing the water table slowly. So we want to extend the time as long as possible. So hopefully several hundred years, but at least for 100 years, that's our goal. So we started these projects. I want to go through some examples. If we may go to the next slide. So we started a local effort, and again, this is a local experience. I want to emphasize that. We looked at types of infiltrations. I call it enhanced infiltration or recharge of water that goes to waste. As was said before, most of the water runs down. It goes out here in the valley floor, which is a very thick clay layer basically underneath. And I was told by the hydrologist, by Jeff and USGS hydrologist, that not a drop goes down at the Red Lake area. Nothing goes back to the aquifer, which is a waste. So we looked at 3 different methods of recharge. And number one is the cost, of course, and the loss. The most cost-effective and the cheapest way is just to dig a pond at the mountain front, like Representative Griffith asked about, where the water comes out of the mountains, and then the underlying near-surface soils are rocky, and gravelly, sandy, which are free draining, I would say. And so water goes down fast. And basically just dig a pond and build an embankment, hold the water, and it will drain itself down to the aquifer without doing anything else. Now, if we go further down towards the valley floor, then we use also dry wells, or we call it Vados zone recharge wells, which recharges into the Vados zone. That's the zone above the groundwater table, where it's an uncontrolled recharge. We don't know how fast the water will reach the groundwater table, but we know it will reach it eventually. It may take years, but it's a lot cheaper method. So give you an idea on cost, these ponds typically, the range could be wide range, but typically I would say about around $10,000. A dry well, we're doing dry wells. The city of Kingman is doing dry wells, and they budgeting about $30,000. And these are fancy dry wells, go down about 40 feet, and also have a sedimentation well or basin that takes out the sediment, so only the clean water gets recharged. So it's about $30,000. And then the last method is the injection wells. This is the sure way to get it down to the groundwater. And so our water table is deep, over 500 feet, some places down to 800. So I have to drill down all the way down there, and then it's just like a production well, but reverse, where we recharge into the aquifer. And I will talk about it later. We have a project example where we are doing that or have done that. Actually, the city of Kingman is doing that. So if we may go to the next slide, please. So first of all, I don't want to spend too much time, but we look at the for site selection. That's what Jeff asked me to focus on. We look at the legal criteria, and that's obvious. We look at it might be surface water right allocations, the waters of the U.S. designations. I want to mention that the Wallapai Basin so far is a closed basin, so the surface water is not waters of the United States. It doesn't drain into the Colorado River, so we are lucky in that point. But it could be especially for the dry wells, ADEQ permit for aquifer protection, which is pretty straightforward permitting. So basically what we did, we looked at the major washes. We have only so much water, like Representative Griffith pointed out, there is only so much water. In Kingman, we average have about 12 inches of rain a year. This year is a lot less, last year was a lot less. So anyway, we located all the major washes that come out of the mountains, all the surrounding hills, and then we look for suitable properties, and we're looking for basically free land and county, city right-of-ways, drainage parcels. We have an application with BLM right now. They are very helpful, willing to give us land for that specific purpose at a very reasonable price. And then we're working with private property owners, partnership for property donations, or possibly they do the project themselves. And so basically a quick assessment we do on the flow quantities, so make sure we have enough water before we look at too much. And then we look at the geotechnical properties, see how it drains, so how expensive the infiltration will be, whether it's going to be just a pond or dry well, or may need an injection well. And then look at the cost feasibility before we go any further. If I may go to the next slide, please. So if the site looks feasible just by these basic values, and then we go into a more detailed feasibility evaluation. It's more of a feasibility engineering study. We establish the hydrology and the flow, and looking typically, but not necessarily, we look at the 10% annual probability of rainfall, but sometimes we want to retain the 100% probability rainfall. So, and then looking at sites that are favorable again for clean sand and gravel with low fines content. And then if we find those sites, then they don't need anything. We can just make a pond. If we do, then go to the injection well, evaluate the site geometry, how big the basin can be, how much water can be held, so how much can we actually recharge on an annual basis. And then we do a conceptual engineering design and a cost estimate and a cost benefit evaluation. And at that point, we pretty much put it on the shelf and then we wait for funding. So we have quite a few projects where we already have funding and we have done it, and the others we're still waiting. If I may go to the next slide. These are project examples. So we looked at dozens and dozens of sites, and even these project examples, that these are good candidates. Some of them contain multiple sites. So I just want to show that the estimated yearly capacity that we can recharge. Our goal was to get maybe 50% of Kingman's annual water demand, which is Kingman's water demand, residential, industrial, commercial, altogether is about 8,000 acre feet roughly. So we're looking, if we can produce about 4,000 acre feet in that sub-basin, then it will, potentially give about 50% of Kingman's water demand. So these are the projects that we have in mind, and as you can see, some of them have higher capacity, some lower capacity. So a cost-benefit ratio and how can we get the funding for it. So please go to the next slide. So the first and very successful project it's almost complete. The Kingman reclaimed water injection well. And this is out on the valley floor, and it's close to of course, the wastewater treatment plant. But it's luckily also not too far from the Kingman well, so whatever we recharge there, it will go back, hopefully, to the Kingman production wells. And the city approved that project. It's under construction. It's almost complete. We spent about $1 million on the injection well itself and all the other structures and pumps, and the system cost is about $1.6 million. And that itself we're looking for recharging about 1,200 acre feet per year. So that goes a long way. That's about 15% of Kingman's average annual water demand. And they have a potential expanding that. So that gives a good potential. That's a good step. And again, we're just looking for expanding the years, how long this aquifer will last. And that's a good step in the right direction. So please go to the next slide. And this is a much smaller project, but I just wanted to show this was a very reasonable cost project. If you can see on the picture, that's a detention basin that was already there. And 1 year we had like 5 feet of water in it, and thinking about it, that what does this water do? And eventually it runs down the streets, and then it becomes stormwater, and it creates more erosion and street maintenance. So what the city did, and we worked together with our flood control district, we put a little infiltration trench at the lowest point, and the city spent quite a bit of money on this to make it nice. Basically, we dug a trench and filled it up with gravel, with filter fabric, and since they took down the fence too, so the park operates as it should be. And now the water, instead of running down the streets, it will recharge into the aquifer. And for this particular site, we did some geotechnical borings actually to make sure it will work, and we find some good permeable layers. And it cost $86,000, but again, it's mostly for the city park enhancement. Please go to the next slide. There is a lot of other potential all around, new developments, new subdivisions. I targeted 3 of them that it's in the mountain front property, between the mountain front and the valley floor, where we still have good gravelly, sandy soils, where the percolation rates are high. Water just goes down by itself. But in addition to that, so these detention basins are already there, most of them. Some of them, we can put them in later, but the ones that are in there, the city budgeted $300,000 each year, so they're putting in about 10 dry wells in addition to that. So that will enhance the recharge, and it's probably a rapid recharge, so we can probably capture a lot more than the 10% probability of storms, maybe 100% with the dry wells. So this is a good program. Again, it's relatively cost effective, and it can be managed on the local level. The next slide, please. The next slide just shows the location. So these are fairly new subdivisions. When I say fairly new, in the past 10 years or 20 years, and developing fast. And then because of the flood control requirements, now they're putting in the detention basins. Previously they were not, but most of them, we already have the detention basins. This just shows how our procedure, the model, the flows going through the washes, going through the development, and we cooperate with the flood control district, where we use the flow to D model to get the flow capacities, and you can see the colors. The lighter the color, the more flow, and that's where we capture the water. So we have about a couple of dozen sites that the city is going to be doing. Please go to the next slide. This project, I just wanted to throw it in there. This was done in 2012, and it was not for water supply, but it was a recharge basin, and it's not actually not even in the Wallapai Valley, but it's a successful project. I just wanted to show that it can be done, and because people ask us frequently, can it be done? Is it going to work? Well, it's been working. So this is a subdivision down in Mojave Valley, where the ground surface is flat like a pancake. It doesn't flow. It was developed prior to the flood control regulations, actually, so there's no channels, and it would be really difficult to put in channels to carry floodwaters away. So this subdivision about a decade ago was flooded twice, where we had like a foot of water in the houses. It was a total disaster. And so it would have cost millions of dollars to build channels, because again, the ground surface is flat. So came up with that idea that we do a detention basin. We bought some properties, actually empty lots, and then they put in these recharge basins, a couple of them, and it was $500,000. But it's been working. They haven't been flooded since. Again, we did some geotechnical borings there too, so we evaluated that we have some sand layers that it will actually percolate, and it's been working. It's keeping this subdivision out of flood damage. Next slide, please. And again, innovative funding. Valley Vista, that's north of Kingman. We have a lot, mainly dirt roads out there, and they always get washed out in large storms. So the road department, the public works department, are willing to spend money, because they're spending so much reestablishing those roads, and actually have to shut down the roads after major washes, that they were looking for solutions. So they were willing to fund the project with the flood control district, where bought a 8-acre parcel, and just like in the previous presentation that we saw in Cochise County. And then, so we put a large detention basin in there, and then we are going to spend another $10,000 for an infiltration trench at the bottom, because the upper layers are pretty clay, so it doesn't drain by itself. But we did some geotechnical borings. We go down about 10 feet, and it will drain well. And so that's the last phase. And that way we save the roads, prevent flood damage, and the water, instead of running out and evaporating, will go back to the aquifer again. So that's, again, it's a cooperation. It's just innovative funding. That's why I wanted to show it. Next slide, please. Other innovative way of funding a project, we we're partnering with a private developer. Actually, the private developer is willing to do everything. They have a development agreement with the city that they're going to put in a freeway interchange on I-40 that will connect to the Kingman Airport Industrial Park, a road you can see on the right indicated with red. And the developer who purchased the property, all that property north up to the airport, they would have to do flood control measures before they can develop it. So they'd have to raise the grade because it's frequently gets flooded. There's a major wash, the Rattlesnake Wash going through that property. And so instead of doing that, we talked with them, they're willing to put in large detention basins that will contain the 100-year flood. And so they don't have to raise the grade, don't have to spend the money for flood control purposes. But in the area, it's gravelly, sandy, it will drain fast, and all that water will go back to the aquifer. All we're doing at this point is providing data to them, flow data and the geotechnical data. So, and it's going to be done and designed by the private developer, and hopefully it will succeed. So it's another project example I wanted to show that I think will be a win-win, because the developer eventually will save some money, but we not only prevent flooding, but we get the water out of it, which is very precious for our community right now. Next slide, please. So this is actually the project area where the water comes out of the Wallapai Mountains. And you can see the basins A, B, and C. Those are on BLM land. So actually, we, the county, applied for the BLM land, and we make them available to build the basins there. And the basins D and E are on private property, and the developer will do it on their own. And then, so we did a feasibility study, again, working with the flood control district, just to see how much water can be obtained, a 10-year flood, a 100-year flow, and then how much can be recharged, actually. Next slide, please. Another private developer, agricultural developer, east of the Kingman Airport Industrial Park. So you can see on the left side of the picture shows the Kingman Airport Industrial Park. That's where most of the industry is in the Kingman area. And the property extends, it's a checkerboarded. It extends up to the Peacock Mountains. And we helped the developer just identify properties, about a dozen. And then on the right-hand side, you can see our methodology. Basically, we look at the watershed in the Wallapai Mountain area, how much rain can we capture, and then we can calculate at the point where we can build a detention pond and potentially a dry well. And like I said, we have about a dozen of those, and the private developer said that they're going to do it on their own, which going to help them, but also going to help our aquifer and the water supply for the city of Kingman. Next slide, please. And the last one is a potential project. We haven't got too far with it, but this shows the Kingman High School. It's actually state land. The parcel is all state land around it. There's another junior high school there. And so on the left-hand side is Bank Street, which gets flooded. Every time we have a big storm, we have several inches of water running down Bank Street. It acts like a channel. It's been like that forever. So in my tenure with the county, we regularly had to close down the road, Bank Street, and close down the school, actually. And the flood control district worked with the Public Works Department. The Public Works Department, Road Department, is trying to find a solution. So they came up with a design to put a long culvert along Bank Street and spend almost like $1 million. So we thought, if you want to spend that kind of money, we could put in a injection well, and ask the high school to apply for state land to put in a ball field, which shows with the green. It's a potential project. We haven't proceeded on it yet, but that would capture the water, and it would act like a retention basin, and we put a injection well, which would cost about $1 million. And instead of flooding Bank Street, water would not run out and evaporate, but would go back to the aquifer. So that would be a major step. That project would need quite a bit more funding, so we haven't proceeded too far with it. And this is my last slide. I tried to go fast and be brief, and if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Nick, Jeff here. Yeah, this is really good stuff, and you've done. It's been a lot of work and effort already put in, and that's great. I can't think of a better or more important project than keeping flooded streets away from a high school, because you have young drivers on flooded streets. That sounds like an accident waiting to happen, pardon the pun. But so my question to you is, you're an engineer. I think you have a lot of background and that enabled you to really do some evaluation of criteria and sites and such. But do you see a value in developing something that others that maybe aren't engineers could use to help them start to identify projects and sites around the state?
Yes, Jeff, thank you very much. And so my background, I used to be also the Mojave County Flood Control District Engineer and manager, and also was Assistant Public Works Director. So I know the issues. So what I found very useful is working with the Flood Control District of the counties, because they know where the floods are, and they already have models where they have the flows. So most of the areas, even us, even Mojave County, we are a rural county, but even most of our washes are already studied. So it's very straightforward, very easy to get the flows and how much water can we retain. So they can, if you work with them, they should be able to give some good ideas. I know Maricopa County is way ahead, or also Pima County. I mean, they have tremendous resources. So that's what I would suggest to get flow data from them in addition to the state. But they have a lot of good information, and they know the areas potentially. And also, as you mentioned, you're looking at state land, and I understand that that's what the state wants to do. But there are also other government properties, county and city right-of-ways potentially. And that's what I focused on personally, because those usually those local governments will be glad to do it, and so you can get the land rent-free basically and get their cooperation.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff and Nick. Does anybody else have some questions for Nick?
I don't have any questions, but I do have a comment, Carol.
Yes, please, Representative Griffin.
I'm excited to see, it shows you what can be done in cities and the previous one in much rural areas. And I think it's a win-win. I think, maybe we, after session or sometime down the road, I would think we would like to go see all these projects and build on what we have. There's a lot of experience that we already have in our communities. Thank you, Nick, for all you do. But I'm excited. I think we could do something good and partner along the way and learn from others as to what works and what doesn't work.
And if I may say, thank you, Representative Griffin, for all your support for these projects. And I also want to thank Jeff and ADWR for their support, because they've been tremendous help in providing us help and information.
Absolutely.
It's our pleasure. Does anybody else have any questions or comments in follow-up to Nick's presentation? Okay, I'm not hearing anything. Thank you, Nick, very much for taking the time to be with us today and to share all of these great projects. As Representative Griffin says, I mean, this really gave us an idea of the variety of opportunities that are available. So thank you. Okay, Kennedy, if you could move to the next slide, please. So I just want to take a moment here and follow up to the two presentations that we just saw. You know, Nick noted in his presentation that he was really describing their local experiences, and clearly John was as well. The dozens and dozens of opportunities that are available. Some of these opportunities are already in existence. As Nick noted, there were already existing detention basins they were able to take advantage of. Many of these projects have multiple benefits, and you know, the folks on the ground are best equipped to know what their local opportunities are. And if given that there could be these many different opportunities, you know, we really didn't want to try to limit those opportunities, you know, to try to narrow down our list of 331 sites any further, because we wanted to give everybody the opportunity to examine everything that might exist out there. You know, and one of the things that John noted was, if you understand the bureaucracy, it's not that bad an experience to cite one of these projects. And he also noted that with some assistance to guide you through the process, that it could be even easier. And another thing that stood out for me from these presentations was the collaboration between agencies, you know, finding opportunities to work with cities or with Bureau of Land Management or State Land Department to accomplish these projects. You know, the public-private partnerships that could be available in the innovative funding opportunities. So all of this to me speaks in support of an idea that we've been kicking around for some time. And as I mentioned, we shared with Representative Griffin to create a guide that will help folks to cite and start exploring the opportunities for these kind of projects. So with that, I would like to pass it over to Emily, who is one of our hydrology team. She's been working closely with me and Jeff and Ben on this project. And she's really pulling together the framework of this guide. And I want to thank her for all of her work. She's going to explain what we're proposing. So Emily, if you would please do that, we'd appreciate it.
Sure. Thanks, Carol. So I want to talk about the overview of our proposed approach. And, you know, Jeff and Carol have really given the background of how we got to this point. We're calling this, it's like a guide to underground water storage site selection. And so it's a document that would include the sections to, you know, siting, design, and permitting an underground water storage facility in Arizona. So it's really intended to be a general compilation of the kinds of things to look for and to think about, you know, with the recognition that every community is going to be a little bit different. The structure we have so far is up on the screen. It's essentially an introductory section that's going to outline the purpose of the document, give some background on how it came about, discuss the initial work by the state to develop, you know, these 331 sites, and that's what Jeff has already covered. After the intro, we've outlined what we're calling initial investigations for interested parties to consider. We've got 5 subsections that will take the user through some lists of things to look at. And I'll note that we tried to make the list as complete as possible, but there are certainly things that we missed. So we'll caveat that in the guide and right now. I'll go through a quick description of each subsection. The first one is land use status, which is meant to identify conflicts between the project and current land use. And here we would point the reader to a mapping website where they can find their parcel, see if there's an existing lease on the land, and start to get familiar with the neighboring land uses. Next, we get into the technical feasibility. And this really goes into like water availability and runoff, what's your soil type for infiltration, what's your depth to bedrock. We would include some pointers to like online calculators where they could, identify their watershed and, map out their area of interest, and then really get a more detailed idea of what their runoff depth and soil type might be. So after that, we get into the regulatory and permitting considerations. And this would really be, a list of the federal and state permits and regulations that they might need to navigate. So this is the recognition that there's always going to be some level of red tape. And so this section is intended to help the user look for that so they're not surprised later and that they can work through it before they invest too much effort. So after that section, we have the last two sections, which are called facility conceptual development and facility design. These are issues that would largely be worked out later in the project and likely with the help of like engineers or other kinds of consultants. But we wanted to include these considerations in the guide because it's like, what's your facility footprint and what are your anticipated operation and maintenance needs? And this would be so people can start thinking about what like the long-term care and associated cost of their project might be. So that is just the overview of the approach, and I'll turn it over to Carol again. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Emily.
Carol,
so-
can I jump in here real quick?
Yeah, please do, Jeff.
So I just have to tie together, Nick's presentation kind of touched on a lot of the things that are identified by Emily there. And then the one thing that John really brought up is in his presentation was, navigating the, it took 11 years, and a lot of that's related to the quote unquote red tape or the some of the regulatory things. So to me, hearing especially Nick, he kind of touched on a lot of the things. He's already done them in his project work evaluation. So I this ties so much together for me, this guidebook approach with what Nick and John have already experienced and been through. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. Yeah, that's my feeling too, that we had a sense that this would be helpful. And the more that we've talked to people, the more convinced we are that we have something that will be useful in development. And I think these two presentations today definitely underscored that for me as well. But that's part of what we wanted to accomplish today, was to hear from this subcommittee, now that we've provided you with a description of what we think would be helpful, what we think would be a useful outcome from all of these discussions that we've been having. We'd like to know from you, what is your initial reaction to this? We will provide you with the outline that Emily has created in follow-up to this meeting, so that you have time to look through that and provide more detailed thoughts after the meeting. But we'd like to know, what is your sense of this, just sort of off the cuff as we've introduced it to you today? Do you like the approach? Is there, do you think it would be useful? Is there anybody else that we should bring into this conversation? And anybody else who might be able to provide helpful feedback or input to us? So with that, I'd like to open it up. Very quiet. Any comments?
I'll make a comment,
Oh,
Carol.
thank you, Representative Griffin.
Okay, your land use status that will show the leasee. Keep in mind, especially on the Ladd Ranch, that's private property, and it worked. Our rural natural resource industries can do a lot, forestry and such as well. But that leasee is going to be very important and may be very supportive of a project, as the Ladds are, even though that's private property. But so making sure the leasee is involved in the process is going to be very, very important.
Absolutely. Thank you for that.
Carol, this is Bruce. I think this makes sense. It's especially the presentations from Nick and John that really give you some lessons learned. And I think it's very important that as part of this guide, you provide, those stakeholders or interested parties a very good understanding of the agencies that they're going to have to work with, the value that they can bring, some of the data that they can bring to assist them in their analysis. So that was something that I really got out of the presentations from John and Nick. It's just the different agencies and groups that they had to work through. I think that would do a very good service to those that are interested in evaluating storage sites.
Yes, Carol, this is Bass.
Yes, Bass.
I seem to recall in the document, I don't have it right before me, but there was some focus or direction of these selection to waterways or existing, streams or rivers or somewhere, some water conveyance area. And the examples that we just were provided between Mr. Ladd and then what I believe is Nick gave up there, those were in areas outside of that, and they seem to have at least there's some pretty positive benefits to that. So I think I want to make sure that we don't just limit the site selection to an existing waterway, or it I can't remember the exact language, but it was seemingly directing more towards places where water is moving in a wash or a river or a stream or something to that. And so anyway, I think they gave great examples of the benefits of doing it outside of that area.
Carol, can I?
Oh, please do, Jeff.
Yes. So Bass, so in the original evaluation that was done as a result of Senate Bill 1399, the department did an intersection of a water course. It could be anything from an ephemeral wash with state land and then, alluvial material. So while that was the criteria that was used, and it's hard to see the parcels that the state land parcels that were identified from that. There is lots of room on those parcels that aren't actually in the water course itself. So there's opportunities to expand outside of the actual water course. So, and I think it's safe to say that you wouldn't necessarily have to limit yourself to being in the water course to do any of these things.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's good. That's nice
Yes.
to know, because I think that there's a lot of places that won't be right near or in it that we'll see benefits just like were presented today. So that's good to know. Thanks, Jeff.
Yeah, and one follow-up I had on that too is it was pretty evident from Nick and even John that the flood, anything that might help deal with flooding gets a lot of positive attention from other agencies and flood control districts and things. So it doesn't really necessarily matter where the water's coming from, but if you have an issue with flooding and you can come up with some way to help fix that, that goes a long way in getting cooperation and probably funding, which again, regardless of where it's happening, resolving that issue is a good thing for a lot of, both for the putting water underground and for taking care of that problem.
I think there's a lot of opportunity on that end. As if you can go back, we can take you to places around the state where decades ago they put spreader, we call them dikes, on state lands that to slow down a sheet flow on a on a sloping mountainside a little bit, or lands that was sloping that had a little more slope than normal, and there were some benefits to that, and there's a lot of areas around the state where those are, that maybe they have either been breached or other things have happened, and they have both of the factors. I think they have a flood control value, and they have a somewhat of a recharge value too. So that's good to know. Thanks.
Yeah, and your comment, Bass, really speaks to where we were headed with this guide, which was, in the original report, as Jeff said, we selected these 331 sites that were then narrowed down further. But, we're thinking with the guide, if we just give the guidance that people need to consider opportunities wherever they may be, and they don't have to be limited to these sites that we've identified that are kind of obvious. As Jeff said, anywhere you have water running, you might have an opportunity. So we're just trying to even open it up further and enable the possibilities.
Excellent. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate the comment. Does anybody else have any feedback on this? Initial thoughts, suggestions? Make sure I'm giving everybody the opportunity. I see in the chat box we have a comment from Heidi. She said the land department supports the guide. It would create transparency and assist the possible stakeholder with pros, cons based on possible locations. Thank you for that. Appreciate it, Heidi. Do we have any other comments before we turn to considering next steps? Okay, well, there'll certainly be plenty of opportunity for additional input and feedback. This is just the initial rollout of our concept here. So what we're going to need from all of you in terms of next steps, we will email out to you the outline. And what we're thinking is setting a date for a deadline for feedback. We have a long-term water augmentation committee meeting coming up in 2 weeks. I was thinking if it's realistic, it would be great to get feedback even potentially before that long-term water augmentation committee meeting, or even if you all just had time to look it over and think about it. I think it would be good for our chair of this subcommittee, Doug, to report out what we've arrived at here in the subcommittee to the larger committee. Wade, does that sound like a good idea to you? Might have lost Wade at this point. Oh, no, he's still on. Well, if he has any comments, I'm sure he'll jump in. So based on what feedback that we get from the subcommittee via email or voice, if you want to call me or any of the staff here at the department, that would be great. And what feedback we get from the long-term water augmentation committee, we can determine whether we need another subcommittee to further flesh this out. And I'm thinking that Wade might also want to update the council on where we are as well. Does anybody have any thoughts about those next steps or timeline? Another question I'd like to ask is, when would we like to shoot to complete a draft of this?
Carol, I just wanted to jump into just to reiterate that, yeah, we're going to put out the outline, but then the goal is to turn that outline into the guide document, a narrative. Yep. It's not intended to be a long, verbose thing, but it'll build from an outline to an actual document.
Yes.
Well, what sounds like a good would say nothing short of 90 days and probably closer to 120 or 180.
Mm-hmm. Jeff, Emily, what are your thoughts?
Oh, I'm thinking the 90 to 120 range. Emily, if anything.
Reasonable.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, well, I encourage everybody to take a look at this and start collecting your thoughts. Wade, what do you think about having some conversation about this at the Long-Term Water Augmentation Committee meeting?
Definitely, probably the major item on the agenda.
Okay, sounds good. Any other thoughts from anybody?
Just that it's an action plan maybe, and that it's just not another report or another form, that it turns into an action plan, and that it doesn't makes it easy and not just somebody taking a look at it and say, oh, well, I can't do all of that, and bring it into everyday language so that it's not confusing for a small community or a small area in rural Arizona that might want to be involved.
That's really good feedback. Absolutely.
I definitely agree with Representative Griffin. But what has been laid out today shows the opportunity for action. It shows the opportunity for doing some augmentation, which is what we want to move on up to the council and make sure they understand that. But getting it up to the council then gets it out to the rest of the Arizona water community so that they can start looking at it. This is not a sit back and wait for development type thing.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that we heard today that has been helpful has been the support and enthusiasm of local and state leaders. So I think that this is exactly the sort of thing that's helpful to bring to the council, who are leaders in their communities and in the state. I think that they can help highlight the possibilities and help champion them. All right, well, not seeing any other comments in the chat box, and I think we have a plan to carry forward with. I thank you all for your patience. It's taken us a while to get this group back together, but I think that the time we've spent developing this has been well invested. Thank you for all the great feedback today. Really appreciate it. And we will get the information out to you as soon as possible. We'll have the recording and the presentation posted on our website probably by tomorrow. So Wade, as our stand-in chair, do you have any final comments?
Certainly do, and thank you very much, Carol, and thank you so much for taking over, Doug. I recognize that you have spent a lot of time on this. Certainly, the rest of the people at ADWR have contributed greatly, but bringing in those outside presenters and making sure that we have adequate review and commentary on this particular subject has been well worthwhile. So thank you so much. We look forward to the day when we sit across the table again.
As do we, absolutely. Well, we couldn't do all of this without all of you on the subcommittee and the Long-Term Water Augmentation Committee. So with that, thank you everyone for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks at the Long-Term Water Augmentation Committee meeting.
Wait, send us your rain and keep praying. We need more rain. Send us your rain, not your water, your rain. Okay?
Yeah, we need the rain everywhere.
Okay.
Well, you're right. We could send you all our rain in